Disclaimer. Warning. This video may challenge deeply rooted beliefs and blow your mind. No animals were harmed in the making of this video though. The purpose is to provide information and encourage open, civilized debate. It may also shamelessly try to remind you to subscribe, like and share.
What's a coconut doing on a beach in Portugal? We'll get back to that in a moment. But first, let's clear something up. Yes, the Vikings reached America before Columbus, and possibly even the Romans and Carthaginians before them. However, their discoveries had no lasting impact. For centuries, the horizon remained shrouded in mystery. Here be dragons, as they say. Now, back to that coconut washed up on a central Portuguese beach. Every year, the tides carry all kinds of debris from the western shores of the Americas. Sometimes entire logs from Caribbean palm trees and other exotic plants make their way across the ocean like that coconut. The idea that mariners of the time had no suspicion of land to the west is simply not true. There were reports of sightings by fishermen, and some maps even depicted mythical islands to the west, like St. Brendan, and one with the now famous name of Brazil. In the 1450s, the Portuguese reached the westernmost islands of the Azores, Flores and Corvo, already in the North American plate. Diogo and João de Teve, two notable navigators, led these efforts. They were returning from an exploratory trip to Terra Nova, which we now know as Newfoundland. Fernando Colón, in his account of the life of his father, Christopher Columbus, supported by historian Bartolomé de las Casas, mentions that de Teve had sailed to the Americas around 40 years before Columbus. But this story isn't about who got there first. It's about a methodical, deliberate project to introduce the new world to the old one. Among all the theories, this one is perhaps the most widely fascinating, and it might just blow your mind. After all, if the world can accept the romanticized tale of an illiterate wool weaver's son who learned how to read and write, but never actually wrote a line in any Italian dialect to his supposed countrymen, who rose to marry into nobility in a foreign land, had audiences with kings, and supposedly had no idea what he had discovered, then surely the Portuguese theory sounds far more plausible. There isn't just one Portuguese theory, actually. At least three exist, reflecting the navigators' deeply ingrained connections in the country. But we will only focus on one, likely the most famous, which ties up more loose ends and is the most well-rounded. It's also supported by many researchers who have compiled decades of evidence. Their meticulous work sheds new light on the motivations behind Colón's voyages. Most stories start at the beginning, but not with this man. Colón is best described by Winston Churchill's famous remark, "It's a riddle wrapped in a mystery inside an enigma." This lack of clarity only adds to the intrigue surrounding his origins. Was he deliberately hiding his past, or was it simply lost to time? What we do know, and all agree, is that Colón spent his formative years in Portugal, immersing himself in the maritime culture that would later define his career. He spent a significant part of his life there, marrying and fathering a son, yet there is no evidence he ever wrote in Portuguese. However, his Spanish writings are filled with what seems Portuguese grammatical structures and spelling mistakes, typical of someone whose mother tongue was Portuguese and who learned Spanish later. This is a crucial clue. One might expect to find traces of his existence in Portuguese records. After all, he was involved in significant maritime ventures. However, such documents are conspicuously absent. This absence suggests that the name Cristóbal Colón, he used in Spain and later in his official documents, was not his real name. Moreover, some Spanish records refer to Colón as a foreigner, and even as Portuguese. This alone is a smoking gun, yet it has been strangely overlooked by historians, so distracted that they fail to notice he never wrote in any Italian dialect, not even in his correspondence with Genoese associates. Could he have been someone else entirely, hiding in plain sight? The mystery of Cristóbal Colón's early life continues to captivate and confound, leaving us with more questions than answers. So, why the secrecy about his origins? To understand this, we need to look at the early reign of King Dom João II of Portugal. When he came to power, the new king declared he had been reduced to lord of the roads and paths of the country, and set out to reclaim property deeds that had been seized arbitrarily by the feudal nobility. This led to a failed conspiracy against him, and many noblemen who were not arrested or executed fled to Castile, fearing for their lives and forfeiting their property. Among those fleeing noblemen may have been a man who would come to be known as Cristobal Colon. This would give him a strong reason to hide his true identity. Yet, despite this, he maintained a curious familiarity with King João II, who referred to him as our special friend in Seville. King João was not only busy subduing internal rivals, but also externally. In 1480, the Treaty of Alcazovas was signed between Portugal and Spain, dividing the Atlantic into two zones of influence. This agreement was crucial for Portuguese expeditions along the African coast and their ambition to break into the Asian spice trade. But the Spanish were not deterred, so something more was needed to distract them. Coincidentally, Colon arrived in Castile seeking patronage for his ambitious expedition. Now that we have the context, what exactly is the Portuguese theory? According to researchers like Mascarenhas Barreto, Luciano da Silva and Manuel Rosa, Christopher Colomb was a code name for a spy working for King João II of Portugal. His mission? To lead the Spanish astray by convincing them to sail westward to the New World, while the Portuguese pursued their true goal of navigating around Africa to reach Asia. By diverting Spain's attention to lands where there was little of commercial value, Columbus effectively sent them on a wild goose chase. Let that sink in. It sounds wild, but it makes sense when you connect the dots. The dark legend claiming that Columbus didn't know where he was, his stubborn insistence until his death that he had reached Asia, and even the oath he forced his crew to swear that they were in Asia. Furthermore, João II's swift reaction to Columbus's discoveries, claiming them for Portugal, and forcing a new treaty with a vertical line of demarcation, pushing the line from 100 to 370 leagues, thus securing a foothold in what would later become Brazil. All points to this being a carefully crafted ruse and a Machiavellian secret plan. Not to mention, upon his return from the New World, Columbus went to see the King of Portugal first, spending several days with him before informing the Spanish monarchs who had sponsored his journey. This could help explain why Colomb eventually fell out of favor with the Spanish crown once it became clear that he hadn't reached Asia. After all, Portuguese vessels loaded with spices from the east were pouring into Lisbon, while the Spanish were struggling in the New World. Feeling a bit skeptic about this spy story? Wait, there's more. Well, Colomb wasn't the only spy in the service of His Majesty King Dom Jome II, who is unfairly underrated by history. The king also sent spies on overland missions to India and to locate the mythical kingdom of Prester John. Dom João II, being the target of many conspiracies, relied on a secret intelligence network tasked not only with gathering information, but also with disinformation to protect the interests of the Portuguese crown, especially its project to reach India by sea, a plan that had been adopted from his great-great-uncle, Prince Henry the Navigator. Not so hard to believe once you remember that Portugal was at the forefront of this new era of discovery and expansion. So who was really this man that signed Expo Ferens? I'll see you in the next video.